Star Trek. The original series' only two-part episode created one of the franchise's best tropes. When Star Trek, the original series aired The Menagerie, Parts I and II, in 1966, it quietly did something no other episode of the classic show ever attempted. It told a single story across 2 consecutive hours. In a franchise now famous for season-long arcs, multi-episode Borg invasions, and sprawling Dominion wars, that fact alone feels almost quaint. But The Menagerie wasn't just a structural experiment. It accidentally invented one of Star Trek's most enduring and flexible storytelling tropes, one the franchise has returned to again and again for nearly 60 years. More than a clever reuse of footage or a cost-saving measure, The Menagerie created the template for Star Trek's courtroom episodes, moral trials, and reflective flashback-driven stories. It proved that Star Trek could pause its weekly adventure format and put its characters and its ideals on trial. And in doing so, it set a precedent that later series would elevate into some of the franchise's most powerful philosophical hours. The context. Why The Menagerie was even necessary. To understand why The Menagerie matters so much, you have to understand how unusual its existence was. The original series almost never did multi-part stories. Gene Roddenberry and NBC favored episodic television that could be aired out of order in syndication. Cliffhangers were risky. Continuity-heavy storytelling was discouraged. And yet The Menagerie exists because of a production emergency. By the middle of season 1, Star Trek was over budget and behind schedule. The solution was radical but ingenious. Reuse footage from the unaired original pilot, The Cage, starring Jeffrey Hunter as Captain Christopher Pike. That footage was expensive, beautifully shot, and sitting unused in a vault. Roddenberry built an entirely new story around it, framing Pike's old mission as evidence in a Starfleet court-martial. The result was Star Trek's only 2-part episode, and the accidental birth of a trope the franchise would return to endlessly. The first great Star Trek trial. At its core, The Menagerie is a courtroom drama. Captain Kirk's first officer, Spock, hijacks the Enterprise, violates General Order 7, commits mutiny, and abducts a severely injured former Starfleet captain. The episode opens not with exploration or danger, but with legal procedure. There are charges. There's testimony. There's evidence. There's judgment. This was revolutionary for Star Trek in 1966. Science fiction television at the time rarely stopped to interrogate its heroes through institutional lenses. The Menagerie didn't just ask whether Spock's actions were justified. It asked whether Starfleet itself was morally equipped to judge them. The courtroom wasn't just a plot device. It was a philosophical arena. That framework, the trial as a means of exploring ethics, became one of Star Trek's most powerful recurring tropes. The birth of the Star Trek trial episode trope. The Menagerie established the blueprint for a specific kind of Star Trek story. 1. A character is accused of violating Starfleet law. 2. The episode slows down into testimony and reflection. 3. Flashbacks or evidence recontextualize past events. 4. The real question becomes moral, not legal. 5. Starfleet's ideals are put under the microscope. Later series would refine this formula, but The Menagerie invented it. Without it, episodes like The Next Generation's Measure of a Man likely wouldn't exist. Neither would The Drumhead, Court-Martial, which followed directly in TOS, Deep Space Nine's Rules of Engagement, or Voyager's Author. Even Strange New Worlds has embraced this DNA, framing ethical debates through formal hearings and trials. Every time Star Trek stops to ask, what does the law mean when the law is wrong? It's echoing The Menagerie. Flashbacks as storytelling, not gimmick. Another trope The Menagerie pioneered was the serious, story-driven use of flashbacks. Yes, the episode famously reused footage from The Cage, but the brilliance lies in how it did so. These weren't lazy recaps. They were diegetic, presented as classified Starfleet records, viewed by characters within the story. Pike's past wasn't just shown to the audience. It was judged. This technique, reframing earlier events to change their meaning, became a cornerstone of Star Trek storytelling. Later series would use logs, holodeck reconstructions, memory implants, and time travel to accomplish the same effect. The idea that past episodes could gain new emotional weight when revisited through a different lens started here. In The Menagerie, the flashbacks forced Kirk and the audience to confront Pike's fate, Starfleet's rigidity, and the cost of command. That reflective quality would become essential to Star Trek's identity. Christopher Pike. The tragic captain archetype is born. Before the menagerie, Starfleet captains were almost mythic. They were competent, decisive, and largely unbroken. Pike changes that. The Pike we see in the menagerie is physically destroyed, confined to a beeping chair, unable to communicate except through yes or no signals. Yet the episode insists that his life still has value, dignity, and even the right to happiness. This introduces another major Star Trek trope, the tragic Starfleet legend. Pike becomes the first example of a captain whose greatness is defined not by victory, but by sacrifice. That archetype echoes through the franchise, from Benjamin Sisko's personal losses, to Jean-Luc Picard's assimilation trauma, to Michael Burnham's lifelong burden of destiny. Modern Star Trek, especially Strange New Worlds, has built entire seasons around the inevitability of Pike's fate. None of that emotional weight exists without the menagerie reframing him not as a failed prototype, but as a foundational hero. Spock's defining act of loyalty. The menagerie also created the template for another enduring Star Trek trope, the loyal officer who breaks the rules to uphold a higher moral truth. Spock's mutiny isn't portrayed as villainy. It's portrayed as necessity. Logic, for once, is not aligned with Starfleet law, but with compassion. This is one of the earliest examples of Star Trek arguing that rules exist to serve people, not the other way around. That idea becomes central to Spock's character across decades of storytelling. It also becomes a recurring theme for Starfleet officers in every era. When to obey, when to resist, and when to redefine duty. From Data's fight for autonomy, to Janeway's constant ethical compromises, to Burnham's career-defining insubordination. The franchise keeps returning to the question the menagerie posed first. What happens when the right thing is illegal? The illusion of paradise. A classic Star Trek warning. Another trope quietly reinforced by the menagerie is Star Trek's skepticism of artificial utopias. Talos IV offers Pike a perfect illusion, a life free from pain, regret, and physical limitation. It's tempting, and for Pike, it's ultimately accepted. But the episode doesn't present this as a simple victory. It's complicated, bittersweet, and morally gray. Star Trek would revisit this idea constantly. The danger of comfort without freedom, happiness without choice. From the Borg's promise of unity, to the nexus in generations, to holodeck addictions and simulated realities, Star Trek repeatedly warns that paradise without agency is a prison. The menagerie is the first time that warning is delivered not through a villain, but through mercy. Why this trope endures? What makes the tropes born from the menagerie so powerful is their flexibility. Courtroom episodes aren't about budgets or recycled footage anymore. They are about introspection. They allow Star Trek to slow down, examine its own values, and invite the audience to do the same. In a franchise defined by starships and spectacles, the trial episode is where Star Trek proves it's more than just science fiction. It becomes moral philosophy in uniform. That tradition continues because it works. It creates tension without explosion,